Someone asks again why you are still single, or why you spend the holiday alone, or why you have not settled down the way everyone around you seems to have, and you feel the familiar urge to explain yourself, to justify a life circumstance that requires no actual justification at all, as though being alone were a decision made incorrectly, rather than simply one honest, legitimate way a life can currently look. Nobody demands the same explanation from people in relationships. Nobody asks a happily partnered person to defend their choice the way they ask you to defend yours. Carl Jung had a real understanding of why solitude specifically seems to require constant explanation in a way coupled life almost never does. Jung believed that a culture organized heavily around partnership and family as the assumed default markers of a complete life treats any deviation from that default as something requiring account, regardless of whether the actual person living that deviation experiences it as a problem at all. This is not a reflection of your actual life being somehow incomplete. It is a reflection of a widely shared, largely unexamined cultural assumption, one that treats coupling as the unquestioned norm and solitude as the exception that must explain itself, even when the person living the exception is entirely at peace with their own circumstances. This explains why the pressure to explain yourself persists regardless of how genuinely content you actually are, since the demand for explanation was never really about your actual internal experience. It is about a cultural default that treats your life circumstance as inherently in need of justification, purely because it does not match the assumed norm, whether or not that norm actually reflects what would make you personally happiest. If you recognize this pattern in your own life, hear this clearly. You do not owe anyone an explanation for being single, or for choosing solitude, or for building a life that does not center around a partner, any more than a happily partnered person owes an explanation for theirs. The demand for justification says something about a widely shared cultural assumption. It says nothing at all about whether your actual life is genuinely working for you. Here is what actually helps. It helps to prepare a brief, calm, non-defensive response for these moments, something that neither over-explains nor apologizes. A simple, warm acknowledgement that you are genuinely happy with your life as it currently is, delivered with the same casual confidence a partnered person would use describing theirs, rather than the anxious, lengthy justification the old pattern automatically reaches for. This removes the implicit apology from the response entirely, treating your own life circumstance as exactly what it actually is, one legitimate way among many that a genuinely good life can look. There is a second thing worth doing deliberately, and it protects your own peace more directly than managing other people's questions ever can. It helps to notice honestly whether you have internalized this cultural assumption yourself, quietly measuring your own life against a default you may not actually want, and to consciously examine whether your current circumstance genuinely reflects your own authentic wishes, separate entirely from whether it matches what everyone else around you seems to be doing. If it does genuinely reflect your own wishes, the outside pressure to explain yourself becomes considerably easier to meet with calm confidence rather than anxious justification. Think honestly about the last time you felt compelled to explain or defend being single or being alone, and consider whether that explanation was actually necessary, or whether you were simply responding to a cultural assumption that treats your life as an exception requiring account. Right below the single word for what you actually value most about your current life, whatever shape it currently takes. Naming it and offering it plainly the next time someone expects an apology you do not actually owe is the real and practical way this exhausting pattern of constant justification finally starts to ease. Because feeling like you owe everyone an explanation for being alone was never, according to Carl Jung's understanding, evidence that your actual life is somehow incomplete. It was a widely shared cultural assumption treating your genuine chosen circumstance as an exception, when it was always simply one legitimate way among many that a real and good life can look.